This is our third program in collaboration with the Social Science Research Council. This has been a rich and deep and invigorating partnership, and I very much look forward to continuing dreaming up and presenting other important conversations together. It's been a joy to work with them. Thank you everybody from SSRC who's here. And I now have the pleasure of introducing one of my partners in crime from SSRC, Mike Miller, Program Officer, Media and Democracy Program, to say a little bit more and introduce our moderator. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you to our partner and neighbor, Brooklyn Historical Society, for hosting yet another wonderful event. Thank you to several people working behind the scenes to help bring this event together: Penny Weber, Cole Edick, James Kerwin, Stephen Thompson, Bo Mendez, and Anthony Jackson. And of course, thank you everyone in the audience who has come out, as my mother says, on a school night to be here with us as we try to get to the bottom of things. My name is Mike Miller, and I'm a program officer at the Social Science Research Council in a program called Media and Democracy. For those of you unfamiliar with our work, the council is an independent, nonprofit institution committed to mobilizing knowledge for the public good. For close to a century, the council has served as a platform for cultivating new research paradigms and connecting scholars across disciplines and borders. The Media and Democracy Program in particular aims to stimulate research and reflection on the impact of innovations in media technology on democratic practices, and to place ongoing political and technological change in broader historical and cultural contexts. And so tonight, we take up this task by reflecting on the nature of American media throughout history. It seems we hear daily about media failure, media polarization, foreign interference on social media, and the creeping specter of disinformation or fake news in common parlance. And I think it's for good reason. These are difficult problems and serious threats to a free society. But such statements are often made with a heavy dose of wistfulness, a suggestion that in the good old days, things were different, better, and that somehow we've lost our way. In the romantic version of American media history, we'd gather around the TV and Walter Cronkite would deliver us the unvarnished, unfiltered truth. Just the facts, ma'am. And we trace this tradition, this commitment to objectivity, apparently in a straight line back to those intrepid pamphleteers of the American Revolution, who, in pursuit of liberty, worked tirelessly to expose the lies and hypocrisy of the British Crown. This is the storybook version of the American media, and it is just that. It is a story. It has a beginning, and for the pessimists or the nostalgic among us, it has already had an end. Moreover, it includes a narrative that highlights those episodes that are consistent with our values, that inform our morals or our ethics. And to be fair, these stories are worthwhile. I won't deny that. But when we obscure the less savory aspects of this history, the parts about profit motive and partisanship and the bias implicit in a homogeneous journalist corpse, we also blind ourselves to the mechanisms by which we have overcome our worst inclinations. We blind ourselves to the efforts to establish norms that steer journalists towards objectivity, fairness, accuracy, and self-correction. We blind ourselves to the struggle for inclusion so that a diversity of voices might be represented in the public record. And to those endeavors to balance the need of news organizations to make revenue or profit with the duty to provide a public good, one which we probably don't want to rely on governments exclusively for, that is, trustworthy news. Because none of this happened by accident, nor by divine providence. To even approximate the storybook version of American media, American citizens had to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. All of which is to say that the gaps in the storybook narrative are opportunities for us now. They are opportunities to learn. If the problems facing media today seem intractable, if it feels as though we are searching for answers in the dark, then we could do much worse than to look to our past and to learn from the work done by those who have come before us. We can't, of course, end there, but it's a good place to start. And so tonight, I think we have a great opportunity and a great privilege to hear from 4 experts on the history of American media, 4 experts who will no doubt fill some of those gaps in our knowledge and thereby, hopefully, help us on our way forward. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce now our first expert and our moderator. Kathryn Cramer Brownell is Associate Professor of History at Purdue University. Her research and teaching focus on the intersections between media, politics, and popular culture, with a particular emphasis on the American presidency. She also writes regularly for popular media outlets, including Reuters, Time, Washington Post, and NBC Think, among others, and serves as a co-editor of the history section of the Washington Post, Made by History. So, Brooklyn, please join me in welcoming Dr. Brownell and our panel.
Thank you so much, Mike and Marcia. Thank you to the Brooklyn Historical Society for hosting us here and all the work that has gone into it, and especially to the SSRC in coordinating tonight's event and the next 2 days, in which we join with many scholars who are in the room to continue this really important question about the connections between media, politics, and some of these basic questions about citizenship and democracy that are embedded within those relationships. I am honored to be the moderator for this evening, especially because we have such a distinguished panel that will generate such an engaging and informative conversation about media and democracy. To my left, we have Andie Tucher, who is a historian and journalist who has taught in the journalism school at Columbia since 1998. She is currently working on a book for the Columbia University Press about the history of fake news in America. Before coming to Columbia, Tucker served as a speechwriter for the Clinton and Gore campaign in 1992. In the middle, we have Karen Hunter, who is an esteemed talk radio show host. Named as one of the Heavy 100 by the Talkers magazine, which basically means one of the most influential, one of the 100 most influential radio hosts in America. Karen Hunter has blazed a trail, bringing more action and less talk to her radio shows. She has pursued some really provocative interviews and has become noted by really pushing change in her shows, encouraging her listeners to get involved and to participate in the current issues of the day. And then on the end, we have Kim Gallen, an assistant professor of history at Purdue University. She has just finished a manuscript on the politics of class, gender, and sexuality in the early 20th century. And she is also the founder and director of the Black Press Research Collective. So thank you for joining us here tonight. As Mike, oh yes, we can give them a round of applause. So Mike outlined the goals of what we want to accomplish with this conversation. And one of the key issues that we wanted to interrogate is that romanticized version of media history that really is perpetuated in constant criticisms of our current media landscape, in which the nonstop nature of 24/7 news, the excesses of social media are lamented, and instead this era in which people were informed, knowledgeable, and dedicated to the truth persisted. As he mentioned, this is a very problematic idea of history, but what we want to do here is to think about the ways in which objectivity has been debated and to use that contest over what truth is to think about larger political and cultural shifts in American history. So I thought I would start today with a very basic question that is very broad as well. But if you could each speak about in your scholarship and in your work, your professional experience, what is objectivity and truth? What does that mean to you? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Can they be achieved? Who would like to start?
I think Kim wants to start.
I don't mind starting. So I work on the Black press, early 20th century Black press to be exact. And so I come at objectivity a little bit differently, I think, than maybe others do. I guess when I think about objectivity in sort of the most broadest sense, it's about, neutral, if we're thinking about news media, neutral news reporting, no bias, no emotion, no opinion. And again, that's sort of the definition we all sort of have come to understand and quite frankly expect in our in the media. And I know we're gonna, Katie has some questions specifically about the Black press, but in the frame of the news media historically around issues around race, which we'll get to at some point, I would argue that there's never been a time, to my knowledge, that there's truly been an objective press or objectivity. Neutral news reporting, but I do think that we've gotten away from this idea of what, at least initially, what the early 20th century sort of thinkers about objectivity really meant. And they really meant it to be more of a craft rather than a person, right? And I think now we've, as an audience, have conflated or expected to have objective people when we all come with our own biases and our own lens and our own perspectives. And I think when the initial notion around objectivity was more of a craft, a neutral sort of type of news reporting, a way to try to assign a level of objectivity to news.
Oh, hey, hi y'all. I teach at Hunter College. I've taught journalism there for 15 years, and before that NYU, and I never teach my students to be objective because objectivity is impossible. What I teach them is to be fair, and what has been lacking, I heard Mike talk about Walter Cronkite. Okay. Lacking, we're applauding lacking? Okay, all right, listen. What I heard Mike talk about Walter Cronkite, I grew up on Walter Cronkite, but what I also grew up on was a lack of diversity. Mm-hmm. And in a newsroom that is 4% Black, in a world that so many things are happening without anyone with a perspective to talk about what's happening, it means no one gets what's going on. There's no fairness when you don't have representation. So the goal is not objectivity. The goal is to have representation and for people to be fair about the stories that they cover. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion.
Hi. I teach a course in journalism history for Columbia journalism students, master's students, and a lot of them come into the class and they think, why on earth do I have to study history? In journalism, all you care about is what happened 10 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of shocked. And they're even more shocked when I start giving them readings from the 18th and the 19th centuries, and they say, but it's not objective, they failed. And I say, why would you think that they should be objective? Well, everything's supposed to be objective and they can't and it fails. Why do you think, where did that rule come from? Well, because everything is supposed to be objective. And we push a little bit more and it finally becomes clear. There is a sense that objectivity is two things. One, brought down from the mountain on its stone tablet, that, a rule that has been there forever, and also unattainable. And the second may be true, but the first is completely bananas, because in the first 200-300 years of the U.S. press, which is what I focus on, the newspaper was supposed to be a political organ. Right. It was intended to be a political apparatus. The editors of newspapers were political party members. They talked about what was going on in Washington in politics. It was a radical breakthrough in the 1830s when some people started to think maybe they could sell newspapers in a different way if they didn't talk about politics. Mm-hmm. But it was a very slow process, and not until the beginning of the 20th century did objectivity, so-called, become a value. And almost the moment it became a value, it also was understood to be sort of, a phantom. But this is one of those great myths of journalism, that it's criticized for something that it never really intended from the beginning either.
So where does that come from, that idea, that pursuit, in terms of the historical context? Can you talk a little bit about where that comes from as a historical construct?
The idea of objectivity? There was a lot going on in the beginning of the 20th century. There was a real sense that newspapers were terrible, and they were. This was the era of the yellow press with Hearst and Pulitzer, who were writing about the Spanish-American War and doing it in ways that were extremely inflammatory and completely made up. There was an argument at the time, I've written about this, an argument in the 1880s and 90s in which many journalists were saying, I love to fake, it's fun, readers like it when I fake. And what they meant was embellishment, making up some quotes, doing a little bit of tweaking, nothing like the nefarious wholesale invention that it has since become. But there was a sense in the late 19th century that journalism wasn't serving democracy. And it went along, the reform movement was caught up in all sorts of things, the progressive era reformers, a growing interest in science and objectivity, in reason, the kind of a desperation that something needed to change. It was a slow process, and one of the main drivers of that process was the New York Times, when Adolph Oakes bought the New York Times, and he wanted to make it respectable. And by being respectable, that sort of meant you had to be a little bit more scientific and a little bit more objective. But mainly, he wanted to be decent.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you hear that narrative about the history of what people would define as a mainstream press, which I actually take issue with that. But just as, there's this turn to objectivity in what is mainstream, i.e. the white press, the black press is absolutely non-objective, and that's what they are telling their readers, which are largely African Americans, is that we can't afford to be objective, right, in whatever this objectivity, and that we are going to be an advocacy press. We are advocating for African Americans. We're about uplifting. We're about raising consciousness. We are about trying to make sure that the humanity of black people is heard throughout the world. And so what makes the black press so strong and so powerful is their lack of objectivity, right? They already understand that the mainstream press is not objective, and they already understand that the mainstream press distorts, if not outright tells lies about what it means to be a black person, right? And so they come in saying that, we are going to be biased. We're going to be biased towards uplifting and advocating for African Americans. And you find it interesting, even as there's this turn to objectivity in the black press, there's a pushing away at that notion.
Well, there's always been a tension between newspapers, news organizations that choose to follow that objective rule and others that choose not to. There's the very strong tradition of an advocacy press, strong in the African American press, but the women's press, all sorts of what you might call marginalized or outlying groups. But that's another reason that objectivity is not the story of American journalism,
Right.
because there's always been this large group of other kinds of approaches.
Can you talk a little bit more about the ways in which women, African American, different ethnic communities have formed their own presses? What goes into that in terms of the organization, the resources, and then, as you spoke of, Kim, as well, the style of journalism?
Yeah. One of the things, as the press becomes more popular and there's this idea that we can sell these papers and we can use advertising to largely sell these papers, the black press, largely all the way up through its, and a lot of historians call the Black press of the early 20th century, the golden age of the Black press, because of how popular and how powerful the press was. Mostly, they could not count on national advertisers, right? So they always had to depend on a strong subscription base. They always had to depend on selling papers and speaking specifically to a wide range of audience and interest. And so the Black press of the early 20th century builds their paper and the power of the paper on their readers and their communities, because the advertising dollars and the revenue is always elusive because of racism and advertisers not wanting their products, quite frankly, to appear in Black papers because they felt as though it would marginalize it. And the Black press is absolutely sensational. I write in my book, and sensationalism has been stigmatized and marginalized. I make a different type of argument for sensationalism, but the press is very sensational and very emotional and very charged on a lot of different aspects. And again, it was really speaking to a specific type of readership.
I'm struggling with the notion of what is the role of media, right? As you're talking, Kim, I'm thinking about Ida B. Wells, who was very unemotional as she surgically and methodically went to places no man would go to tell the stories of people who were literally being snatched up out of their beds and lynched and burned to death and raped in all manner of horror, and told those stories to this day. It's the only reason why we know about the lynchings, and there's a whole museum dedicated in Alabama. That was media. That was journalism at its best, and I sit here today on the shoulders of the work that Ida B. Wells did, because without her, I would never have gone into journalism. She paved the way in many ways. So, what's the role of media? I mean, I think we're so caught up in what we're in right now, and even at the beginning, I'm glad you mentioned that it was always kind of a political arm, but I would even argue that it was propaganda, to the point that, I just think about, like, take the Vietnam War. Did we ever get the other side? Did we get the other side? Do we still know why did we go to that war? Why did that happen? Did Walter Cronkite tell us that there was another side to this? I don't think he did. And if he was really being a journalist, we would know. We talked today about Venezuela. What did Chavez really do? Or Cuba? Why are they our enemy? Was Castro 100% bad? In this trade war, is China wrong? Are we ever going to get that perspective from our media that China is wrong, or that they're right? Because they could be right. I don't know, but.
Well, media is such a huge word, too, because if you know where to look, you can find other sides, other stories. But it's so overwhelming, particularly in the past 25 years with the internet, that to figure out how to navigate all of that information and to determine where it comes from and what it's saying and what kind of reporting went into that, if any reporting went into that at all. Was it a reporter who did this work? That's become really hard. But it's fashionable to say that the press is doing a really lousy job, and a lot of times, yes, it's doing a really lousy job, but there are corners and pockets of work that is really great, really impressive.
But we don't hear about it because there's no money, right? There's no money in it, and we're a capitalist society, so we have to also embrace that, right? Because that kind of is what drives us.
But think also, you said, did we get the other side of the Vietnam War? Harrison Salisbury went to North Vietnam. He was a New York Times reporter. He came back and reported about that, and he was savaged for it. He was investigated for it by the government. Right. But he did tell that story in the way that he could.
I can remember being a journalist at the New York Daily News, and very young, in my 20s, and I was in sports for a minute, but when I ended up on the news side, editors would send you out on stories, but they kind of sent you out with a slant. Like, they kind of told you what the story was before you got out there. And I always thought that was curious, but I also would bring back the story that they asked me to bring back, because I also understood that was the pathway to being successful in the newsroom, is to deliver for your editors. And today, I look back, I'm not a journalist, so let me just say that I'm not a historian. I respect these women greatly. But I look back on those times, and I wonder how many other people did exactly what an editor who's sitting in a desk with their own opinions about something sends you out to get a story, and you're going to bring them back exactly what they told you to and not actually find this story. How often does that happen today, and what's the fallout for that? I think we're dealing with it now. But it's my 2 cents.
Well, is there a role, Kim, you talked about the important role that the Black black press played historically, is there still a role for these different types of press that give voice to new communities? So for the black press, for women, for different ethnic communities, what role do they have to play today?
Well, as an avid listener of Karen Hunter's show, I think, quite frankly, I mean, I think the role of the black press and black media is needed even more today, or needed just as much, but in different ways. And I think Karen mentioned it, and just in terms of the representation. And I don't know the numbers as well as she does, but I do know that when I am reading stories in the media, when we are looking at how specific people are represented or presented. And I'm just thinking about how the recent police shooting in Baytown, Texas, and how the mugshot of this woman that was murdered by the police is being used in the media, how very much a black media and black representation is needed at news organizations to critique that sort of reporting, quite frankly. And so, black newspapers that are still around, I don't know how they're doing it.
I was going to say, where are they? I mean,
they're there, and they have a very small, very loyal population, and they're reporting in some, great local news. But quite frankly, after the civil rights movement, this is a narrative that has been written, and there are more black journalists going back to the black press. But after desegregation, and our best black journalists went to, mainstream news organizations.
Right, and as you're saying this, I'm thinking in my head, like, what's the black press today?
Yeah.
Because if everything is predicated upon money and it's supply and demand, there's no real demand for it, and I only do what I do in spite of, because every day I'm combing through all kinds of stories, and I watched the decline. I did a radio show on WWRL like 1,000 years ago, and I used to get up at 4 o'clock, because it was a morning show, and I was able, within the first paragraph, to know everything that was going on in a story. And when I came back into radio 4 years ago, I started my same routine, and I was horrified that I would sometimes go through an entire story in some of the most reputable papers and still not know basic facts.
Yeah. It's Twitter. I mean, quite frankly, I would say that the black press, if I were thinking about how the black press is manifested today, it's largely Twitter, which is incredibly problematic, because one of the reasons why the black press could be so fiercely independent and really could say a lot of things that couldn't be said in other places is because, A, they weren't beholden to advertisers, they weren't beholden to a corporate interest, and now when you have a lot of great stuff happening on social media, on Twitter, but there's the corporate entity, and black people don't own Twitter and are not even represented.
But we rule Twitter, all right?
we do, but it's all at the behest of...
No, I get you, but without black Twitter, there wouldn't have been an Oscar So White. There wouldn't have been the decimation of HBO for trying to do a slavery fan fiction. Was it fan fiction, slavery miniseries? Without black Twitter, I wouldn't know 90% of the social pop culture stuff. I wouldn't know anything about Cardi B. So I appreciate black Twitter immensely.
And I hear you, but I'm just looking at the recent sort of, and trust me, I do believe that some of the voices that Facebook has censored, those were done for good reasons, but I am concerned about social media companies silencing certain voices. And I wonder, with things like Twitter, if the voices become too radical, if they become too revolutionary, will they still have that platform?
That's a good point.
Well, can we dig into this question of technology a little bit? Because I think that's really central here. To think about how new technology puts different business pressures on forms of media. It challenges modes of professional behavior and ethics as well. And it also provides new opportunities for voices to come to the forefront to challenge dominant narratives, as you've talked about. So the historian in me wants to make sure that we think about this first as a historical development. And Andie, of course, you're writing a book on this. What role has technology played over the course of the 20th century in reshaping journalism?
Oh, it's played an enormous role, but it's often been a really unexpected role. There are historians of technology will often say things like, well, the technologies will figure out what they're going to do, and it doesn't matter what they're made to do, they will find their own ways. And you see that a lot. Every new technology I've heard of that comes along that has to do with journalism is always going to make us smarter and happier and more of a community and healthier and wiser, and it's going to be the most wonderful thing that ever happened, and immediately somebody finds some other way to make it less impressive, less, and often deleterious to the body politic. They go along together. A new technology happens, and this will happen with it. But they often come. There is often good with the bad. You don't want to say you can't develop new technologies because they might be badly used. Television was going to revolutionize everything. Then Fred Allen, the great radio comic, said they call television a medium because it is neither rare nor well done. And it was
Well done, that's nice.
But so it has a lot to answer for, but it also did bring us new ways of looking at the world, opened new visions of the world that had been shut before, opened visions of people we didn't know, made it possible to see lifestyles and the way people lived and others. So it has had an enormous broadening and opening effect, even as it has also done some really terrible things, like made your kids go in front of it all the time.
And Twitter has been, I think, really impactful. I remember when I first took notice, it was during the Arab Spring, right? And that we probably wouldn't have known. I mean, it was happening in real time, and we all got to see all of that unfold. The other time was Ferguson, and that happened in real time. They were doing things on Twitter before we even, the media, the press even got a hold of it. And all the police shootings, Philando Castile's girlfriend live, we got to watch, unfortunately, a man murdered on Facebook Live. So technology has turned journalism onto itself and allowed for average everyday citizens to become journalists, which I don't know if that's a good thing, but I'd rather have them out there than not. So.
At the same time, and this is not my area of research, I'm speaking more of a student of the work that people are doing. I was reading the other day about social media and news and disinformation, and how this idea of credibility, because my mother has shared an article or my friend has shared an article, it lends it credibility that maybe it wouldn't in another context, right? And so even as social media opens up all these avenues for us to really uncover things that people have known about or being exposed or haven't known about. There's also, it opens up the capacity for more disinformation, quite frankly, where people it always kills me when I hear my students say that they get their news from their Facebook feeds, right, without any sort of verification, without any sort of cross-checking, and so that's, I think, been one of the consequences of social media becoming a platform for how we learn about information and things happening.
But it's not going to go away, right? It's not going anywhere.
No, it's
so
not.
we have to learn how to make it viable.
Well, that's it, to learn how to do it. And every time a new one comes along, you don't know what it does.
Yeah.
You don't know how it works. You tend to believe it. The beginning of photography was fascinating. There was, within the first 15 years of the possibility to make images of living people and see them.
Yeah.
Somebody was out there selling spirit photographs. A guy named William Mumler set up a sign, and he said, sit in front of my camera, sit down, and I'll open my lens, and the most amazing thing will happen. There is light bounces off, and the heavens cleave open, and behind you, you will see the spirit of your dead mother. And he held up his photograph, and there was a guy sitting in a chair, and somebody looking like a ghost behind him. He made it with double exposures of some kind or other. He was put on trial for fraud. They couldn't figure out how he did it, so he got off. But people believed this because they wanted to. Yeah. Because new technologies often seem a little uncanny, right? Yeah. And they're going to do something weird, and they're going to extend our capacities in ways that are beyond human.
Yeah.
And you tend to believe that this great new thing can do this.
Right. But I think now, in the last couple years since the election, I think we are really starting to take a much harder look at Dorsey and Zuckerberg and social media. And I want to go back to your comment about capitalism and corporate and these are big money makers, right? I mean, and data is a big commodity, right? And so when you have news being disseminated on these platforms and your data is attached to that and how we share this information, I don't think that, again, the Dorseys and the Zuckerbergs of the world can no longer say that we're just providing this sort of social media platform. It's no longer just a platform for people to connect with friends and share information, right? It's so much more. And I'm not calling for regulation. I'm not, politicizing
We should,
it.
though.
But yeah, I'm okay.
We
well,
should
then-
call for it.
yeah.
Let's call for it.
Okay.
Here, here.
Well, in terms of thinking about the ethics and the business side behind new technology that we see today, what are the demands that are put on in terms of thinking about the ethical values of citizen journalism,
I wanna go back to
or the ways in which it can develop as a business? Should it be developed as a business?
Yeah. Can we talk about citizen journalism a little bit?
Let's do it.
Okay. I had the unfortunate, I was listening to Joe Madison in the morning and talking about citizen journalism. This is before it had even hit Twitter. And again, I'm talking about the shooting. I just want to make sure that I really say this woman's name, Pamela Turner, who was murdered, I think, on Monday evening, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the first reporting that I heard was a caller calling in to tell Joe Madison, who was a local person from the area, that this had happened. It hadn't even hit, because I went immediately and looked and saw on my Twitter followers, had this been, it hit. And I found one video, I made the unfortunate mistake of watching this video. Now, I normally don't watch these videos. I personally have decided that I don't want to traumatize myself, and I don't want to be a part of the spectacle that a lot of these videos become. I made the unfortunate mistake of watching this particular video, and I wouldn't recommend it if you don't want to see that sort of trauma play itself out. But I do want to know about the responsibility of sharing these videos and citizen journalists, and this whole idea. I mean, people have made this claim that, how can we trust these videos? They're only showing one view, they're being uploaded without any sort of vetting, any sort of review. So I'd love to know, what your take on it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know what your perspective is on these videos, also sharing these videos.
I don't watch them either.
Okay.
I think a lot of them are snuff videos. And sometimes we can't avoid it. If it pops up into your feed, it starts playing, and there's there's no regulation.
Right.
But before there were these videos, which seem every day there's a new one, I remember Rodney King, the Rodney King video, right? That was played on a loop, and how emotionally connected we all were, those of us who cared about that, right? And then we were told that what we saw didn't happen because the police officers that did that, they had a reason for doing it because they were found not guilty. And that set off a whole other, so it's not just about whether we can trust what we see, it's once we see something, is anything gonna happen? I watched Walter Scott run away and get shot in the back, and his killer went on trial and was not convicted because someone hung the jury. So what do we do with it as on the other side of it, right? So citizen journalists are taking video. The guy that took the video of Eric Garner, who was choked to death right here in New York and Staten Island, the guy that took the video got arrested. I think he might still be in jail, right? And they're looking for the person that took this video, and I said, don't turn yourself in.
Yeah.
Don't turn yourself in, because that's not gonna end well. So it's, the two sides to this, and I don't know what we do with that. That should be regulated, of course, but, is there gonna be justice even though we're out there reporting? So, I don't know.
It's become even more frightening because of the what we're told is the rise of the deep fake video, which makes it possible
To alter it?
to alter what we used to think was something that was real.
Right, the video.
The video,
yeah.
and people have now been able to experiment taking a video of Barack Obama and making his voice making his mouth say something that's just completely bizarre.
Right.
But it looks, unless you know how to look at it, it looks authentic. So that's another side of the question. One question is, how do we deal when we're told that what we see didn't happen? But then how do we argue back about what we saw when it is possible that it can have been manipulated? This becomes really frightening to me.
How do we think about that perhaps from a historical point of view, and how photography and film allowed for the introduction of violence that could expose realities, but could also then be manipulated and then used for spectacle and for consumption to really undermine the intent of why they were circulated. So how have you seen that throughout history?
Well, there was a really interesting,
No, go ahead. Yeah, please.
really interesting Life magazine, after the Nuremberg trials of the high Nazi leaders, ran a double-page spread of the photographs of, I think, 12 of them who had been executed by hanging. They were cut down. Life magazine took pictures of their bodies and published them in the magazine. Now, Life magazine, if you remember Life magazine, it was the middle-class Bible. It was on, so many homes around America. It had cute dogs. It had starlets. It had children. And then there is these photographs of dead Nazi leaders. Britain chose not to publish them. They said this was an ugly thing to do. It was illegal to publish them in Germany. Life said, we want to show people that they are really dead, so there can be no resurgence of, somebody won't come along and say, I've risen from the dead and we're going to bring the movement back. I don't know how I feel about that, but that kind of question has come up again and again and again and again. I show my students this, and half of them think, okay, that was all right, and then I show them the photographs of not Goebbels, the other one, his children who he poisoned, his 6 beautiful children he poisoned in the bunker at the end. Another Nazi leader. And
Himmler?
No.
They sit here all day.
No, we're
Name
going
that
to
Nazi
all
leader.
of them. Yeah, I can see his face, but anyway, he and his wife poisoned their children at the end so that they would not fall in the hands of the enemy. The students have a very different idea, good, about whether you should show pictures of children who've been poisoned by their Nazi parents, as opposed to seeing photographs of Nazis with the nooses around their necks. But it's a really challenging debate.
Or on the other side, the picture of Emmett Till in his casket.
Yes.
Jet Magazine,
Yes.
Black Media.
Yes,
Jet
of
Magazine, Mamie Till, Mamie Till, decided to show her son. It was chilling. It is a horrific, most horrific image of what happened to him, snatched out of his bed, visiting his family, as we all have, well, not all of us. But so in the Black community, sometimes the family would send you down south for the summer. I spent my summers in Georgia. So he was from Chicago. His mom sent him to stay with his family in Mississippi, and he allegedly catcalled or something, a white woman, but we find out now Carolyn Bryant lied, and he was snatched out of his bed at 2 o'clock in the morning or so, and brutally beaten, shot, had a 75-pound fan wrapped around his neck, and he was thrown in the Tallahatchie River. His mother wanted everyone to see what that looked like, and Rosa Parks said that image was one of the catalysts for her to not get up that day, and it was credited as well as one of the catalysts for the civil rights movement because of the anger that image evoked. So there's another side to that too.
And I think it's been those decisions, because you see the Black press in the early 20th century publishing photographs of lynched bodies, right? And it really is upending this commercial enterprise of selling postcards with lynched bodies, right? So it's taking those lynching postcards, right, which people are buying these postcards and mailing notes and love letters to each other with these, bodies on them. And the Black press, Black media takes those images and disrupts that commercial, that sort of commercial aspect of it. But, even, and you're right, this idea of, how the media portrays death is really politically charged. So I showed my students this. There was, I want to say it was in Kenya, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, there was, I think, a bombing either in Kenya or somewhere, it's really not that important, but New York Times did show some of the bodies, right? And I asked my students about this, and I was teaching a course on, I teach African history, and we were talking about, how the media portrays Africa. And I said, why are they showing these bodies. And I'm like, well, we need to know that this happened. This is something that the world needs to know. And I said, well, we don't show the bodies of, and I'm glad we don't, of people that are killed in mass shootings in the United States. We don't show the bodies of children that are slaughtered in schools. And so even in death, there's a way that some bodies matter and some bodies don't. And I would argue and suggest that non-Black people would not go viral on social media. I don't think their videos would be circulated as heavily as the bodies. And I do think there's some great consciousness raising that happens around this, but I also think it becomes a spectacle. And even one of my graduate students today, taking me to the airport, said she had to stop watching those videos because she realized that yes, it was about consciousness raising, but she was also fascinated. There was a sort of her fascination about it.
If police officers were gunning down white male young people in the streets in their neighborhoods, not only would it go viral, it would stop.
True.
Immediately. There would be gun control laws,
Yeah.
and police would be in jail,
Yeah.
and there would be a whole outrage in this country around how can this happen.
Yeah.
So I think it would go viral, and I think it would go
Would
viral,
go
and it would be a
away,
very
yeah.
limited time that the
Got it.
police would stop
Yeah.
doing that. As I was thinking about this death, we showed the pictures of Saddam Hussein's sons. I remember that very vividly because I was at the news at the time, and that was groundbreaking as well. Uday and Qusay, I think that's their names, to show that they were dead, but yet we didn't show the body of Osama bin Laden, which I still am curious about whether burial at sea, do we think he's dead, really?
But that's what it led to. I mean, many people argued in a really sensitive way that you cannot do this. This is not what civilized people
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
But there is an underground, conviction among a lot of people that he isn't really dead. It was a lie
Because they haven't seen the body.
because they haven't
Right.
seen the photographs
Yeah.
of the body. So the balance, how you balance those concerns, is a really great question.
What about the manipulation of images? Like, I also remember OJ, and how they
Yeah.
darkened him on the cover, was it Time magazine?
Yes.
And how that also, and Tiger Woods, I think, got the same
Yeah.
treatment when he got into the car accident.
Leave Tiger alone.
Well, it brings me to my final question before we open it up to the audience. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. Is if all of this gets to the broader theme of the topic for today. And I'm wondering if you guys could each speak about what fake news, what does that mean to you?
I personally will not use fake news because of the way that it's been used by particular political establishments. I'll just be really clear about that. I prefer to use disinformation, misinformation, but it has become a term now that is just, has been reduced down to this sort of phrase that captures, I think, the very worst of the news media, quite frankly, and the very worst of what we have become as certain segments of our country has become as a political, establishment. I won't say too much more about that, but I don't particularly like the term fake news. I don't think it really speaks to the way that information is being spread to actually disintegrate or to tear down our democracy. I think that it becomes too easy to sort of see it in this sort of reductive way rather than the sort of complicated, nuanced way that it actually is.
I don't use the term either, not for any reason other than it just doesn't flow off the tongue very well. But we wouldn't have quote-unquote fake news if this country, people in this country, weren't so comfortable with being ignorant and weren't so comfortable with being lazy, right? So, I want to know stuff. So I'm going to always dig and check. And, I can't tell you how many times I've checked people on Twitter and said, that story's from 1997. Just reading it. So that means you just read the headline. You didn't even go click into the story. And then you have to go, it's like that just should be a natural thing.
Yeah.
But we're lazy and we're comfortable in our laziness and we're comfortable in our ignorance. This would be unacceptable under normal circumstances, that we would have any disinformation. Those papers would be shut down. We wouldn't read them anymore, but yet here we are, and there are more of them. Now the blogosphere is full of it, from BuzzFeed to, I can't even go into all the stuff that's out there, but we just want to click on headlines, and we're just happy to do that. So we get the news that we deserve. So we created this. This is what we deserve to have.
As I've been working on my book on the history of fake news in America.
You may have an answer.
That's why you're going last.
I mean, people keep asking me, it's worse now than ever, right? It's worse now than ever. And there are two answers to that. One is, yeah, it is worse now than ever, I think, for a lot of reasons, much of it having to do with technology and the capacities and affordances of the new technology that make things so much faster and so hard to avoid. We are swamped with this, and it's really difficult. In the 19th century, you read 3 newspapers a week, but that's probably the only print you saw in a week, so the approaches were different. On the other hand, there has always been this impetus to play a little, to joke a little, to see what you can get away with, to misinform, to disinform. The very first newspaper published in the North American colonies in 1690, Public Occurrences, was shut down because of fake news. For several, I mean, it didn't have a license, there were other issues, but it published a story saying that the King of France was in trouble with his son because he was sleeping with his daughter-in-law.
I like those harmless stories.
Well, it's a harmless
Can
story.
we go back to that?
The King of France didn't have a daughter-in-law, not at the time. But what was going on was it was a religious statement. The editor of Public Occurrences was a dissident Protestant, very angry at the King of France for having revoked the protections against Protestants. I have no proof, I think what he was doing was telling a story that readers would believe about somebody they already thought was a tyrant, and this just fed what they figured. Of course, he's so awful, of course he would sleep with his daughter-in-law, even if he didn't have one. So, I mean, it is a sort of it's a 400-year-old problem, but I do believe that there are issues now that are unprecedented.
Can you give us something to take heart in, some optimism? Are we going somewhere?
We haven't gotten to the last chapter yet.
Yeah, how does the story end?
I don't know yet. I'll tell you after the summer.
Well, please join me in thanking our panel for a terrific conversation. And we do have some time for questions from the audience. Go ahead.
I need sunglasses.
I know.
Yes. If I can't see you, please wave me down.
Good evening. I would just like to say thank goodness for citizen journalists. I'm a retired NYPD person, and I think that police officers should be held to a higher standard since they have the power of life and death. So we shouldn't look away. We shouldn't be, afraid to see what's going on. But my point I want to really make is I'm waiting for the day when journalists will, there are some sectors where they just jump on the bandwagon. And I'll just say things like the measles vaccine. And I've heard journalists call people who want vaccine safety anti-vaxxers and they're crazy and all that. I've heard journalists say that. I don't want to hear journalists say that. I want them to facilitate a robust debate between people on both sides so that we can make up our own minds about what's right for us and what's wrong for us. Same thing with the Amazon issue. You had people just talking about how stupid people were to not let Amazon come in and get tax-free stuff. And I want to hear a robust debate, and I'm hoping that the media at some point will step out of the way and just be the facilitator and not be commenting on those kinds of things where they really don't. I don't want to hear what a journalist has to say about measles. I really don't. So I'm just saying that I just wish they would step out of the way and just facilitate a robust debate.
I actually think journalists shouldn't have, I know this is controversial, Twitter accounts. They should not be allowed to comment and give opinions in public because you are breaking down the very fabric of what it is you're supposed to build, which is trust and credibility, by being able to just speak willy-nilly in a public forum like that. I think if you're a paid journalist, you should not be on social media.
I agree.
So that's just my opinion too. This gentleman.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you for a very informative session. I see that since you guys are all teachers of students, I would love to know what are your students' reaction to their future as journalists, given this whole fake news environment that we're working in.
Oh, okay. Well, so I technically teach journalism, but I have completely abandoned ship about 8 years ago when I saw what was happening and I couldn't stave it off. And so what I teach my students is how to navigate life, and I teach them that it's an ever-evolving medium, and that it's their responsibility to bring it back to where it should be, which is facts, truth, justice, fairness, and all of these things that we don't see in abundance. But I'm very honest about where we are right now. And I tell them, you will go out into the world, you may be able to get a job. People won't edit your stuff. They won't require much of you. And if that's okay, you will work, unfortunately, because the space is about more words. The more words, the more money, the more clicks, the more money, the more ads. It's all driven on that. But if you care about the future of this country, I need some of you to be journalists and be committed to it. And you may not make any money at first, but I think the pendulum is going to swing back. I really do. I think we're in a very strange time, but we're not going to stay here because we're on a roller coaster. It's got to go back up eventually, right?
Yeah. Kim, you asked for from hope, and yeah, I feel the same way about the students I teach, that they are smart and they are passionate and they have, ideals. They do, and that is really encouraging. Yeah. And I am thrilled to pieces to see that, and to
especially this generation.
Yes,
like
yes.
4 years ago, I would say, pack your bags, go to an island somewhere.
Yes.
There's no hope.
Yeah.
But there's something with the 18, 19. There's an awakening in that group that we saw it with Parkland. These kids are not having it. They're informed. They're out there rolling up their sleeves. They're getting involved in ways. 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, this country is not. There's no hope. But now I feel much differently. So you're right.
Yeah.
So I don't teach journalism. I study the press. I am a historian, and so. Yeah, I agree with everything that both of you have said about students and everything. I come from my students, I ask them more about how they consume news, and that is increasingly something that bothers me, is that a lot of students are not reading newspapers or looking at different sorts of news media and doing the cross-checking that I would like to see. And I know that there are more and more college curriculums that are moving less away for how to evaluate a good source and how to discern different types of information and do a lot of the cross-checking, right? I think looking at different sources, there's been a real movement, particularly in the library and information science world, about how it's not just about evaluating whether a source is credible, but looking at the way sources speak to each other and doing some more comparative analysis across different types of sources.
Hi. So I guess this question is tailored to Ms. Karen Hunter and I believe Kim, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So what do you think is the future of the Black press as well as like Black media? Because definitely I have like old Ebony magazine, civil rights, and it was just like hard news. And now I'm feeling as if it's more of entertainment.
Yeah.
And that's all it's been reporting on. So I would just curious to know, like, what are your thoughts on what do you think the future is going to be?
Yeah.
Did they have Dr. Lerone? Was Dr. Lerone Bennett one of the editors of Ebony back? Yeah. So they had like real people editing. Folk. We have a magazine run by a lawyer, not a very good one. I won't say which one. And like, what journalistic back? So, and we have a civil rights guy just started a paper. I'm not even going to trash him either. But you're not journalists, and the fewer journalists we have doing journalism, starting media outlets, because they can make money, the more we're going to get this. And as far as Black media, that the three that I'm thinking of right now that have been sold at least 2 times, and they have a lot of venture capital money, and so the VC money demands certain algorithms or else, so we see a lot more clickbait, and we see a lot more edges snatched and wigs thrown off, and it's a very, to me, not a good thing, especially on the heels of Ebony and Jet closing. Essence, I don't know what's happening with them. No. Turn the cameras off, because I can't speak freely. Y'all don't want me to speak freely here. So as a result, every day I challenge myself, what can I do? That's the question that Joe Madison asks every morning, what can I do? So I'm slowly getting back into that space. That's my foundation. And just like anything, if you don't see something there, you have to create it. So if you feel that strongly about it and you have a journalism background, create it. The market is open for it. Anybody can start a newspaper or an outlet or a blog today, and you can be valuable and viable. So if it's not there, do what Ida B. Wells did. Go out there with your notepad and pen. I don't know what people use. I still use a pen and paper because it's something spiritual about it. Don't laugh at me. It's power. It's power in this ink. But go create the thing that you don't see. But make sure you come with credentials. And if you don't have them, go find a Dr. Lerone Bennett or somebody that has a background.
So what do you think about the North Star?
I'm not, oh my God, now you put me in a position.
I'm sorry.
I'm not talking about
I mean, I
anybody.
hear you when you say about credentials and journalists, and we have, a new news media or new black media that is not being run by journalists.
Yeah.
Not trying to put you in the hot seat.
No, I mean, but journalists should you should have journalists.
Yeah.
Not historians, God bless. Not media, social media, people that have millions of followings. Because, listen, Kim Kardashian is about to become a lawyer. And not going to law school. And I'm like, that's nice. But, and she's going to get you attention, and maybe that'll help your case. But is it what we, it's like we raise our children to work hard and to actually know some things, right? And that there's value in knowing things. And then you can just one day wake up and say, I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to go apprentice at a law firm, and I'm going to go out and then practice law. I'll pass the bar. Then she probably will pass the bar, because we know now Felicity Huffman. Anyway, I mean, that's a whole other, we're not here to talk about that. Strange times. All right, start your paper.
How you doing? This question is for Kim.
What's your name?
Larry.
Hey, Larry.
How you doing? Yeah, you said about when regarding Facebook that certain people, certain people can speak. But you started the whole lecture about diversity. Mm-hmm. So they kind of, in my opinion, it contradicts each other. And I'm a veteran, and when the football player took his knee, I always was one of those guys that wrote, I fought for everybody. Mm-hmm. I don't care if the guy has the craziest idea to the left or the craziest idea to the right. So again, you started off 15 minutes about diversity, and then you said certain people shouldn't be allowed to speak on Facebook. No, I'm saying Kim said this. I heard correctly.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Now, what I want you to do, just...
I said journalists shouldn't be on
Not
social
you.
media.
This question's for Kim.
Okay.
Give me a second. So, again, Kim, you said certain people, because I know I heard correctly. Who controls the gate to certain people? Who's the gatekeeper for that?
Yeah. So I didn't say that certain people shouldn't talk on Facebook. I'm saying that recently Facebook has decided, if I'm not mistaken, to ban certain people because of their views and, quite frankly, some of the disinformation. Mm-hmm. And my whole point in saying that was, and I think your question about who are the gatekeepers is actually a really good question, about when you have corporations that are privately owned and people are using them and they appear to be democratic spaces, right, and be about open exchange and be like sort of this public sphere. When they are privatized and they are corporate and owned, there are gatekeepers, and I think we have to be really careful about seeing them in this democratic fashion, because they truly are not the democratic in the sense of allowing for free and open exchange, that they are, being filtered and people can be censored. And again, this is not to argue against any of the people that were censored or argue for them. It's just to have a conversation about this idea of social media being this open space. But so I wasn't saying that anyone should be, did I answer your question?
Initially, you said certain people, now you're saying everyone. So, and I'm still not sure what you believe.
Yeah.
You believe it's open, or you believe it should be certain people? I'm not sure what you're saying.
Let me be clear. It's not about who I believe should be on social media. It's about the idea that people come to social media believing that it is this open platform, and in reality, it often isn't, or it has the semblance of being open, but there are people making very conscious decisions about who can be on there and who can't be. So for example, some women have posted, I'm talking about Instagram now, maybe images of themselves breastfeeding their child, and those pictures have been taken down because they violate some sort of standards of decency, whereas, there have been other images of people that could be just as problematic, but they're left up. And so someone makes those decisions. So I'm not saying that there are certain people that should be on there or this idea that everyone can be on it. I'm just saying that there are people making decisions, and people come to social media believing that it's this open sphere, and I don't actually think that it is.
So a couple of you mentioned the corporate control of the media, right? This structure being a problem. And social scientists, have these measurements that they do of so-called healthy democracies, and the number one sort of factor there is always a healthy media, right? And if you look at the countries on that list, it's all the Scandinavian countries, and there's a very distinct pattern, which is large percentage of state-owned media. So I'm wondering what the four of you think about this as a proposition, meaning that one of the solutions to this problem would be to have a much greater public sector in the media that was not driven so much by profits as it is now.
I know.
Sorry.
I'm gonna let you take that, Kim.
I'm not taking it.
I've sat in on a lot of discussions about that. There is a lot of sentiment for it among people I speak with, but the people I speak with tend to be, a little not representative. There is an enormous resistance to that among Americans as a whole, an enormous resistance for several reasons. I don't want my tax money going to support, X is a huge one. I don't think government should be involved in supporting things like that. What if government is paying for something that I don't agree with? And there is such a tradition of anti-government, not even, I would like to say it's based on sturdy American values of freedom of speech. I don't think so. I think it's more questions of a sense of ownership of whatever the government pays for is something that I pay for too. I think there's a lot to be said for it. I think there are a lot of dangers to it.
Would you want this government to run your media?
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. That's what I was gonna say.
No, but every 4 years you're gonna get, or 8 years, you're gonna get somebody in there that half of us are gonna hate, and so half of us are gonna. That's where we are now. Half of us hate. We don't know who to trust, and unfortunately, I think it comes back to us. If we weren't so lazy and ignorant, and I know that's not nice, but it's true, we wouldn't put up with the around-the-clock breaking news that's never breaking. Yeah. That is and everybody with the same format of panels, and you have to have left and right fighting as if we are left and right people. I think even those of us in this room who may identify as Democrats or Republican, on the spectrum of that, have very different views on a host of different things and agree probably more often than we don't. And really, if we're about having a media that represents all of us, having the government run it, again, we should hold people accountable. Facebook and Twitter and all these places should be safe spaces, because we should, if Alex Jones is violating certain rules and not putting up great news, then we should shut him down as a people and say, we cancel you. Which I'm all for cancel culture, by the way, in case you didn't know. And because then we have the power to determine what we get back and demand better of our media. So I don't know.
And whether it's actually true in practice, and I do think it is true in practice in many cases, I think many of us have come to expect that the media, the news media, print media specifically, acts as a check on our government. And I don't know how well that could happen if the government is running the news media.
Well, if that were the case, then if the media actually is a check on the government,
or at least it sees.
If it was a check on the government, it would also not allow for the government to lie as much as it did and cover every single lie. On my show, I don't cover lies, I cover policies, right? So I don't get involved with tweets at all anymore. I do something called 5 Minutes of Trump, which is mostly satire. But then we get into what policies are impacting us. I've been, for the last week, kind of looking at what Congress is doing in terms of bills which no one talks about. There are bills being proposed every day in Congress that will impact your life. Do you know what they are? No, but we know that there's breaking news and there's a Mueller this and there's a tweet here and is that news though? Does that help us? But we don't turn it off because there's money, right? Going back to your question. So how do we get the money out? I don't think it should be handing it over to the government. I think we should, just like all politics, we should figure out how money shouldn't play a big part in who we elect and what kind of media that we consume. It should not be part of it. Maybe there should be some welfare or something. So all media, they all get the same amount of money to be able to go out and disseminate. Maybe, I don't know.
Allocation,
listen,
monthly
I don't know. We need to do something though.
Well, that's another problem in America, is that there are so few acceptable alternatives given the tradition that's already there. I mean, there are ways that government can get involved in owning media that offer protections and layers.
Really? Every time you say that, I just think about this government.
I think
and
about
I'm
this
saying that could just go. There are 15 ways that could go wrong.
I don't want to think about this government, but I mean,
we have to.
You think about public television, for instance. The great myth is that the government runs public television. The government actually funds like this much of public television, and the rest.
It's mostly our donations,
yeah,
right?
Mostly, yeah. But I mean, if you look at a model that has some
crowdfunding, some welfare,
and some sort of black box money from the public purse, because
I like black box.
because the media are a public trust and a
Black
public
box money.
necessity.
I think that's a great idea. So can we elect you to
finish
oversee it?
my
We
book
need-
first.
oh. You only have one more chapter, right? Wait, hold on. Wait for the mic.
You totally left out like NPR, or listener-sponsored radio.
Which is similar to
Which is-
PBS in
which
that
is-
it also has a tiny
Yeah,
little bit
I
of
mean,
money.
it's such a major force, I think, that, and also ethnic media, like the Forward, the Jewish presses, the
Yes.
history, very, very important, bringing up so many issues. So it was a little bit stilted, I think.
Okay. We take that rebuke kindly.
Thanks. Professor Tucker, you mentioned that there are some really good newspapers and journalism out there on the edges. Could you tell us what you think they are?
Oh, I was afraid someone was going to ask me that.
Everybody's taking writing.
There is a lot of investigative work. There are small, scrappy publications like, I mean, I am sort of reluctant to name names simply because
Are they mostly local? They're not
they
national?
tend to be local, and that's a fear because so many local ones are going away. That, I think, is a really terrible. But if you look, for instance, at, I think the Pulitzers this year, there were several local newspapers that won prizes for really enterprising investigative work done on shoestring budgets by local staffs. And those, I think, are particularly admirable because of the adversity there, because of all of the counterfactors that are dooming local press. So I think the local press is brilliant and needs to survive as long as it can remain somewhat independent of so often the chain owners. There are opinion magazines that are proudly and openly opinion magazines that do not say we are taking one side or another, and whether or not you believe in them, they offer different perspectives on questions. Part of it is that I think as readers, we have an obligation to read stuff we don't expect we don't know what it's going to tell us already. We need to go and make an effort to find things that will challenge us a little bit. It's very, very easy to read only our favorite 3 news sites and think we're informed. And it's less, this particular publication is good and that particular publication is good, but that the larger picture that is formed if you read a lot of different publications, I think is much healthier.
It's like putting together a puzzle.
Yeah.
A lot of what I think has been discussed tonight is around the issue of who chooses what gets into the media, and whether or not it represents state, corporate, underrepresented populations. That's all really very valid. But when I think of objectivity, I think of being able to answer the question of, can I believe what I'm reading? And, you know, some of us are old enough to have grown up with print media where there was a relatively clear line between reporting and editorial opinion. Do you all think that it's possible now that there's still a way to find out or have some sense, given that we all come with some degree of bias into whatever it is that we're reading, of where somebody can answer the question, can I believe this? Can I believe what I'm reading in terms of a standard of objectivity? Is it out there today at all?
That was a question that really came to the fore when the New York Times and several other newspapers chose to use the word lie about something that Trump said.
Yeah.
And there was an enormous debate among many journalists I know about whether that was appropriate or not. And many people said, well, the president is saying things that are not true. We would not be truthful if we called it anything other than a lie. NPR had a really interesting, I'm not sure yet how I think about it, but an interesting response. NPR said, we don't use that word for several reasons. One of them is lie means that you speak intentionally, something that is, you speak with intention and untruth, and we don't know what his intentions were. The other question, though, was, the other response was, we don't want to drive away potential audience members who would take offense at a characterization. They want to make their own decisions. We want to engage them in an argument. We want to engage them in a conversation. We want to give them the tools for them to choose. And if we come on with an opinion that is too strident, we feel will drive them away. I'm sort of remembering what they said. It was not those words, but that was the sentiment. It was a debate that I had with undergraduates, I had it with graduate students, I had it with fellow professors, and everybody disagreed. But it was a really, I think, striking point that is particularly challenging to hold on to in this very, very partisan era. Partisanship is not conducive to full information.
Was the whole notion of truth just out the window?
I know. That's my question, too.
Yes, it is.
What?
It's simple. And I mean, the larger question I think you're asking is, where will you ask the question actually very pointedly and poignantly? How do I know what I'm reading is true? How do I know it's true? And I don't know, because quite frankly, it's the struggle that I have on a regular basis. You used to be able to trust these papers, and then they all got it wrong, except for the LA Times. And then you're like, okay, but then sometimes they get it wrong. And, all you need is to get it wrong once or twice to erode trust, right? So then you go to what's comfortable and what you're familiar with. And that's kind of where we are. So I think it's going to take a yeoman's effort on the part of the press to win back the trust of the American people. And it's going to take some really hard looks editorially at how we can do that. But you raise a question. I don't think that there's a place that you can go to know that you're absolutely getting the truth.
But I think, you could have probably, and I'll yield to you on this or defer to you, one could have always said that about the news media, right?
Yeah.
And to some degree, this idea of, getting it wrong or right, news media has always gotten it wrong and right, right?
But there's not a commitment to being right. There doesn't appear to be a commitment when you think about Watergate and Washington Post, you think about, the goal was to get to the truth, and it didn't matter, what side of the aisle you were on. People crossed aisles to get to what we all, as an American public, needed to know. And I feel like there's a lot of partisanship in newspapers, in particular. There's a definite bend, and I shouldn't know what your political leanings are. And I got to see it from the inside on the editorial board of the New York Daily News, where it's like, I had a fight one day with my editor, and he's like, this is the opinion of Mort Zuckerman. And I was like, but aren't we supposed to report the truth? He's like, it's an editorial. And it was the light bulb that went on, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, you know, how do we get to the truth if it's always shaped by somebody's opinion? And papers now are owned by people who have opinions. So if I'm Jeff Bezos, am I going to put really investigative pieces in about Amazon? Am I going to really tell the truth
Papers have always been
about
owned
it?
by people who had opinions.
Yes,
You know, Horace Greeley had opinions.
But not the richest man in the world, who has a stake in making sure that his paper is sanitized from anything that might hurt his bottom line, his stock prices. And so are we ever going to really get the truth about Amazon when he has that much power?
I had a student who did a study of how the Washington Post has been covering Amazon since Bezos bought it, and she found that she compared it to several other newspapers and found there was not a lot of difference.
How would we know? What we don't.
She compared it to other newspapers.
What I'm saying is they can only get information that is out there. He knows the truth. If there's something nefarious that he's really doing, I don't trust him, by the way. Let me just say that. Go ahead, y'all can go ahead. I don't know. Somebody that has that much control over every aspect of our life, how, he can also determine what goes out and what doesn't.
Well, the important thing is that we all know it. We all know he owns the Washington Post, right? Everybody
We
sitting
do.
here knows he owns the Washington Post.
There's an interesting question between different versions of the truth and facts that you can find, right? And so, I mean, that's also something to kind of see, that you can put the facts together and interpret what happened differently. But is there a shared commitment to a sense of concrete facts that people can agree upon?
And as you were saying, we have to go through so many different papers to get a full picture now. When before, maybe 30 years ago, you can go to one source and get everything that you need.
Which source?
I don't know. One of them, I'm sure.
Well, it was telling us about Vietnam, and it wasn't telling us the truth.
That's true. All right, I take that back. We've
We
always
have time
been
for
in
one
hell.
more question.
Great. Final question? I think that there are some over there, but I can't really see.
Yeah, we can't. Was it sliding to make us look good for the?
I hope it's
just need to
making us
know.
look good.
It's
I just want to
Very
comment on the very bewilderment over the question of whether it is that we can get the truth and the objectivity. I would proffer the murder of Khashoggi, the Saudi dissident journalist who was working for the Washington Post. That did happen, and of course the Saudi government tried to immediately. They actually dressed. We know the fake videos they tried to produce, right?
Yeah.
And we know that he was killed for playing the fourth estate, trying to speak the truth, right? His truth. And then what happened, of course, was that there is the denial to this day, so what I was caught by Karen's point when she said it's not just do we trust what we see, right? That's the role of the fourth estate, but what do we do after we know the truth? So that other part, nothing has been done really about that, and then we shake hands with America's shaking hands with Putin, and so we do see that this is a global problem, right? And facts matter, and what are you going to do about it? It's something that's also very important.
And just to add, I think your point is excellent, and that there are consequences for telling the truth, as that can cost people's lives, right? That we can't overstate that fact, right?
And the lack of consequences has us distrusting everything, right? So we saw that happen, we know that happened, and no one's paying for that. I talked about Walter Scott being shot in the back. I saw him shot in the back. Nothing's happened. So at some point we get desensitized because there's no consequence. Even if we know some things, nothing's happening. There's no consequence. And we used to be able to also trust the media to keep going until there was something. Even Bill Clinton got impeached. Something happened, right?
But is it the media that's not making things happen, or is it that people are not reading the media and therefore making things happen that they're learning about?
It's symbiotic, right? If they're a dog with a bone with something, and they are driving it home every single day instead of these inane panels of people talking at each other, and they just stayed on something the way good investigative journalists are want to do, right?
The Mueller report?
Have we read it? Who's read it? Every page, every line. Wow, God bless you. God bless you. You're an amazing American. Appreciate you. But, you know, even that wasn't disseminated in a way that I think would have made us conscious of what needs to happen next and expect what needs to happen next. This is my opinion.
And I think you're making a good point. Maybe we are placing too much power in the media.
Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be turned back onto us. We keep saying, what has been done, and maybe it's asking ourselves, what are we doing?
What can the Washington Post do about the death of its journalist, of Khashoggi? What can it do?
Every day, I'm very annoying, and I realize as an annoying person that you get some things done, right? And with the squeaky wheel, a drop of water, I just don't see that hard in the paint, everyday commitment on something until, we may get tired of it, but I know it inside and out, and eventually, you wear people down. And you're right, it's up to us. But which came first? Did we become apathetic, or did the media chase after algorithms, eyeballs, and clicks? I think they go hand in hand, and in many ways, it's like I always use this Oprah, I love Oprah. I use this Oprah analogy. During her height, she was #1, and then the world shifted into this, you are not the father, and I'm gonna throw a chair at you, and I'm sleeping with my uncle, and all of this stuff, and big butts and skinny women, and all of that. And Oprah said, I'm not doing this. And her ratings dropped. And that was like, Oprah's ratings dropped. It's the end of Oprah. And she stayed the course with giving you content that inspired you, that made you feel something, learn something, and her ratings went back up after a couple of years because we got tired of the sugar and the donuts and the big butts and the chair throwing. Now, they're still on there. You're not the father. You're still not the father. But Oprah's Oprah. And, I think somebody needed to hold the door, just to use a Game of Thrones reference. I was promising to do that. You're welcome.
Well, let's end on Oprah and the idea about information being inspiring and empowering as an optimistic way to end our evening. And please join me in thanking these 3 women for their insights and inspiration.